Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, it's great to meet you! I'm Stella, and today I'll show you how to make this cute miniature Christmas-themed gift set for your dolls, and as always, there will be free printables for you to make your own version. You'll find all the info and the download link in the video, so now let's get started. As usual, we'll begin with the easiest piece of the set, these teeny tiny bath bombs, just to get warmed up a bit. We'll simply have to grab a piece of toilet paper. Yes, you heard it right, toilet paper. I'm not above using toilet paper in my mini projects. I mean, after all, it is paper, right? We'll cut the piece in half, then in half again, so we end up with a small rectangle about 4 by 6 centimeters. Next, we'll spray it generously with water until it's nearly soaking. Then we'll quickly roll it between our fingers to form a sort of flattened sphere. We'll repeat this process to make 3 little balls in total. Then we'll cut this part, and as always I suggest using cardstock from old packaging for this, since, well, it's free and that never hurts, but also it's very easy to cut. You can use a cutting machine if you have one, or just regular scissors, a craft knife, or for something as small as this, I definitely suggest using a paper punch like this one. We'll dampen the little snowflake with a bit of water to make it softer and easier to shape. Then we'll glue it on top of one of the bath bombs this way. And finally, we'll give everything a layer of acrylic gesso so the snowflake blends nicely with the base. Now we'll simply have to paint the bath bombs with acrylics, and I may or may not have made way too many because they're so addictive to make. Next, we'll print and cut this little label, and I printed it with my selfie because I wanted it to be super high quality, and I'll have it linked in the description along with all the other supplies I used for this project, just in case you want to add it to your Christmas wish list. But of course, any regular old printer will do just fine, and if you want to get that super shiny finish, you can cover the label with a piece of clear tape. We'll glue the label to one of the bath bombs. And finally, we'll tie a piece of sewing thread around the last bath bomb for a cute extra detail. Next, let's make a tiny candle. First, we'll cut all these tiny circles and we'll stack them together, going from the biggest to the smallest. Then we'll cut the circle 3 or 4 times, and again we'll glue all the layers together. The final disc should be about 2 millimeters thick. We'll repeat this process to make 2 more little discs. Then we'll grab a toothpick, we'll cut it into 3 small sections, and we'll glue each one to the top of one of the discs this way. Finally, we'll stack these 4 pieces together like this. Next, we'll cut the strip, and for this one, I suggest switching to a lightweight type of cardstock since it's thinner and easier to bend. We'll press the strip against a wet sponge to dampen it. Then we'll glue it around the little disc structure we've just assembled. We'll use this part cut into copy paper to connect the 2 ends of the strip. Then we'll cut this part, and again we'll dampen it with water and we'll wrap it around the previous one. And the next step is absolutely optional, but I always like to use some spackle to smooth out the steps between the cardstock layers like this. It's a small detail, but it makes the final piece look more polished. We'll cover the candle with a layer of acrylic gesso first. And then we'll paint it with acrylics. Next, we'll print and cut this little label and we'll glue it around the candle like this. Then we'll cut this part, and if you're using my free printable template, I'd suggest piercing this hole with an awl or a needle. Otherwise, if you have a cutting machine like a Cricut, a Silhouette, or an M1 Ultra like mine, you can use my digital templates, which you can find in my shop, linked in the description. We'll cover it with acrylic gesso first, and then with acrylic paint. And I don't know if you can tell from the video, but I mixed a tiny bit of mica powder into the paint to give it a bit of a shimmery finish. Finally, we'll cut a small piece of sewing thread and we'll slide it into the little hole in the center this way. We'll glue it to the back of the cardstock circle, and then we'll coat the opposite side with a drop of white glue so that it gets a little stiffer. We'll glue the circle into the candle holder. And now we can start working on the next piece, a hand cream tube. First, we'll cut this strip from copy paper and we'll roll it around a toothpick, adding glue as we go. We should it up with this tiny cylinder. Next, we'll cut the strip from lightweight cardstock, we'll dampen it with water, and we'll wrap it around the little cylinder aligned at the bottom. We'll paint the lower half of the cylinder with acrylics. Then we'll print and cut this part, and we'll glue it around the base we've just assembled this way. Finally, we'll seal the top shut. Next up, a tiny body lotion bottle. First, we'll cut the strip twice. We'll wrap one strip around the toothpick this way. Then we'll wrap the second strip around the first one, shifting it slightly downward with each turn so we get this small cylinder with a rounded top. And again, we can use spackle to make this part smoother. Next, we'll fill the bottom of the cylinder with a bit of glue, and then we'll cover it with this little circle. Next, we'll cut the second smaller strip and we'll glue it around the toothpick right above the first one. We'll turn the toothpick so that it sticks out just about 2 mm. Then we'll cut this part and we'll attach it to the top of the toothpick. We should it up with this. We'll coat the entire piece with acrylic gesso. And next, we'll paint the bottle with acrylics. Finally, we'll print and cut this little label and we'll glue it to the bottle like this. It's time to make my favorite item in the set, this Nutcracker shaped bath foam bottle. We'll start by cutting this part 3 or 4 times and we'll glue the layers together. The final piece should be about 2 mm thick. We'll do the same thing for this part. And then we'll join the two pieces together this way. Next, we'll cut the strip twice, and just like we did for the lotion bottle, we'll wrap the first strip around the toothpick. Then we'll wrap the second strip around the first one, shifting it downward with each turn so we get a small cylinder with a rounded top. We'll fill the bottom of the cylinder halfway through with glue. Then we'll trim the paper in excess. And finally, we'll glue the cylinder to the part we assembled earlier. And again, I used a bit of spackle to smooth out the surface. Next, we'll cut this part. We'll dampen it with water, and then we'll glue it around the previous part like this. Finally, we'll take a small bead and we'll glue it to the top of the little crown. We'll coat the entire piece with acrylic gesso. And then we'll paint it with acrylics. With the cap done, let's start working on the bottle. First, we'll cut this little circle 2 or 3 times and we'll stack the layers together. The final piece should be about 1 mm thick. We'll repeat the same step for these parts. And then we'll glue 3 pieces together, stacking them from the largest to the smallest. We'll make a second identical piece, and then we'll join the two together. Next, we'll smooth the surface with a bit of spackle, and by the way, I realized this part might be a bit challenging to cut by hand, so you could swap it for a bead, or you could crunch up some aluminum foil into a little ball instead. Next, we'll take a toothpick and we'll cut its pointy end. We'll glue it to the cardstock base. Then we'll slide the rest of the toothpick into the hole in the base. We'll trim the toothpick so that it sticks out just about 2 mm. Then we'll cover the entire piece with acrylic gesso first. And then we'll paint it with acrylics. Next, we'll cut this teeny tiny mustache and we'll glue it to the face of our little Nutcracker. To make the Nutcracker's hair, we'll once again use the scrunched up toilet paper method. We'll simply make a bunch of really tiny spheres and we'll glue them to the head this way. Now we can move on to the body of our little Nutcracker. First, we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times and we'll stack all the layers together. The final piece should be about 2 mm thick. We'll make 3 pieces in total. We'll set one aside for a moment and we'll combine the remaining 2 together. Next, we'll cut these parts and we'll glue them together, going from the biggest to the smallest. We'll make 3 identical pieces. We'll set one aside and then we'll attach the other 2 to the top and bottom of the part we assembled earlier. Next, we'll cut this circle 3 or 4 times and we'll stack the layers together. The final piece should be 2 mm thick and we'll glue it to the rest of the body. Lastly, we'll grab the 2 parts we set aside earlier, we'll combine them together and we'll attach the resulting piece to the rest of the Nutcracker. At this point, we can coat the whole piece with acrylic gesso. and then we'll paint it with acrylics. Next, we'll cut these parts. We'll press this one with a dotting tool or the handle of a paintbrush to give it a slightly rounded shape, and we'll glue it here. Then we'll paint this one gold, and we'll glue it here. To make the arms of our little nutcracker, we'll simply have to cut this part twice, and we'll wrap both strips to a toothpick this way. The strips should be around 7 millimeters apart, and the whole arm should measure roughly 2 centimeters. As always, we'll cover the entire piece with gesso, and then we'll paint it with acrylics. And of course, we'll have to make 2 arms. We'll glue them to the nutcracker's body, and now we can make the legs. We'll make them similarly to how we made the arms, so we'll wrap this strip around the toothpick. Then we'll wrap the second strip around the first one, aligned at the bottom. Next, we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times, and we'll stack all the layers together. We'll glue the resulting piece to the leg. Then, once again, we'll prime with a bit of acrylic gesso and then paint. We'll make a second identical piece. Then we'll glue both legs to the rest of the body. Finally, we'll attach the body to the head. With the nutcracker ready, all that's left to do is a cute gift box. We'll simply have to cut this part, fold the sides, and glue the tabs. We'll place all our miniatures in the box, fixing them in place with some adhesive putty. Then we'll print and cut this part, and we'll cover this little window with a piece of clear plastic, of course recycled from old packaging. At this point, we'll simply have to fold the sides and wrap the cover around the box. And our tiny Christmas-themed wellness gift set is done. Sorry this video runs so long, I really did try to keep it as short as possible. Actually, you know what? If you made it all the way to the end, maybe drop a little gold star emoji, so I know you're cool with slightly longer videos in the future. As promised, here's a link to the free printables, and if you want to make more beauty products for your dolls, you might enjoy this video next. And this is all for today. Until next time, bye!